I haven't gone outside in 10 years. At 16, my father convinced me I was deathly allergic to the modern world. A boy from school asked me to prom, and Dad's face went dark when I told him. The outside world has become toxic for pure girls like you, he said. The air is full of chemicals that react badly with your specific genetics. He showed me articles about pollution, sick building syndrome, electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Said our family had a rare condition that made us vulnerable. My older sister had supposedly died from exposure when she went to college. The reactions started small. Every time I went outside, I'd suddenly feel dizzy or nauseous. Dad would rush me inside, give me medicine, and hold me while I recovered. I didn't know he was putting sedatives in my morning orange juice, timing them to hit whenever I left the house. Within 6 months, I was having full panic attacks just thinking about going outside. See how your body warns you? He'd say, stroking my hair while I shook. It knows the danger even if your mind doesn't. He pulled me out of school for medical reasons, told everyone I had severe environmental illness, even got a doctor friend to write notes. My room became my world. He installed special air filters that he said were the only thing keeping me alive. The windows were sealed to prevent contamination. I watched from my window as life passed by. Former friends going to college, getting married, having careers. Dad brought me everything I needed, controlled everything I saw. The computer had parental controls even though I was 26. The TV only got certain channels. Books had to be approved for triggering content that might weaken your immunity. My days blurred together. Wake up dizzy from the previous night's medicine. Breakfast with Dad where he'd remind me how lucky I was to be safe. Online classes he'd chosen. Always subjects that kept me dependent. Lunch alone while he worked. Dinner together where he'd tell me about the chaos and danger outside. Evening medicine that made me too foggy to question anything. Sleep, repeat. When I was 20, I tried to leave. Made it to the front door before the reaction hit. Heart racing, throat closing, vision tunneling. Dad found me collapsed on the porch and carried me inside. You almost died, he said, injecting me with something that knocked me out for 2 days. When I woke up, he'd installed locks I couldn't reach and alarms on all the windows. The thing about isolation is that it makes you doubt your own reality. When Dad was my only human contact, his truth became the truth. Maybe I really was allergic. The few times relatives visited, they were kept brief. She's very fragile, Dad would explain, ushering them out after minutes. But bodies don't lie forever. When I was 26, Dad had a heart attack. I watched him collapse in the kitchen, clutching his chest. Every instinct screamed at me to go outside, get help, call someone, but my body wouldn't move. 10 years of conditioning had created invisible chains. I managed to call 911 from inside, whispering to them about my condition, begging them to come in. The paramedics found me pressed against the far wall, shaking, while Dad lay dying 10 feet away. They saved him, barely. While he was in the hospital, his sister Clare came to watch me. Claire didn't believe in my allergies. This is ridiculous, she said, throwing open windows I hadn't seen opened in a decade. Fresh air hit me, and I waited to die. Nothing happened except I could finally breathe properly. She found Dad's medicine cabinet, bottles of sedatives, anxiolytics, antihistamines, enough to keep someone docile and confused for years. He's been drugging you, she said, holding up the bottles. These aren't allergy medications. They're psychiatric drugs. She showed me Dad's internet history on his laptop. Searches for how to induce agoraphobia, sedatives that cause panic symptoms, keeping adult children dependent. Forums where he discussed his success, keeping me safe from modern degeneracy. Claire wanted to call the police, but I begged her not to. I still felt loyal to him. Stockholm Syndrome runs deep. She stayed for a week, slowly reducing my medications, opening doors, letting reality creep back in. The first time I stepped outside without being drugged, I cried. The sun felt like a miracle I'd forgotten existed. But Dad came home eventually. Claire had to leave. She had her own life. And I stood at the threshold, looking at him in his wheelchair, still weak from his heart attack. He looked so fragile, so old, so dependent on me now. You need to take your medicine, he said, holding out the familiar white pills. You've been outside. You'll get sick. I stared at the pills. 10 years of my life in those little white circles. 10 years of being a ghost in my own existence. But also, 10 years of being safe and loved. I know what they are, I said quietly. I know what you've done. His face didn't change. I protected you. The world would have destroyed you like it destroyed your sister. She's a lawyer in Seattle. She's married. She has kids. She's corrupted. Lost. You're pure. I looked at the door. Wide open. Claire had removed the locks before she left. I could walk out right now. But Dad needed me. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I took the pills from his hand and felt my fingers close around them. My hand shook so hard the pills rattled against my palm. Dad smiled at me. That same warm smile he'd given me 1,000 times before while feeding me poison. I forced my lips to curve up in return and brought my hand toward my mouth like I'd done every single day for 10 years. But instead of putting the pills on my tongue, I slipped them into my pocket. The movement felt huge and obvious, like I was screaming my rebellion, but Dad just kept smiling. He wheeled his chair closer to me and started talking about how the outside world had gotten even worse while he was in the hospital. He told me about new pollution studies and chemical spills and how lucky I was that he came home to protect me again. I nodded and made agreeing sounds while my brain kept screaming that Claire had proved all of this was fake. I'd breathed fresh air for a whole week without dying. I'd stood at open windows and felt the breeze on my face and nothing bad happened. Dad kept talking and I kept nodding, playing the role I'd perfected over 10 years of captivity. My pocket felt heavy with those white pills. I told Dad I was really tired and needed to sleep. He looked at me for a long moment and I worried he could see through me somehow. But then he just nodded and told me to rest well, that my body needed recovery time after all the dangerous exposure while he was gone. I walked to my room and closed the door. The locks Claire had removed were still gone. I sat on my bed and pulled the pills from my pocket. 3 tiny white circles sitting in my palm. These little things had stolen my 20s, turned me into a ghost living in my own house. I walked to the bathroom and held my hand over the toilet. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I opened my fingers and let the pills drop. They hit the water with small splashes. I flushed and watched them swirl away. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed waiting for my body to react to not taking the medication. I kept expecting to feel sick or dizzy or panicked, but nothing happened except my mind felt sharper than it had in years. Every sound in the house made me freeze. I heard Dad's wheelchair moving around, the creak of floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator. I was afraid he would somehow know what I'd done. Morning came and I was exhausted, but my brain felt awake in a way that seemed strange. Dad made breakfast like he always did, and I sat at the table watching him move around the kitchen. He kept looking at me while I ate my eggs. He asked if I'd taken my morning medication. The lie came out easier than I expected. I told him yes, and he smiled and said that was good, that I needed to stay on schedule. After breakfast, I went back to my room and found the paper where Claire had written her phone number. My fingers hovered over the call button on my phone for 20 minutes. I kept starting to press it and then stopping. Finally, I just typed 3 words and hit send before I could change my mind. I need help. Claire responded so fast I jumped. She asked if I was safe right now. I texted back that I was okay, but Dad was home and I didn't know what to do. Claire sent message after message telling me she'd been worried sick since she had to leave. She said she'd been looking into options for getting me out safely. She told me I wasn't alone anymore. I had to keep hiding my phone under my pillow every time I heard Dad's wheelchair coming down the hall. We texted back and forth for an hour. Claire said she had a plan, but we needed to be careful and patient. She told me to keep pretending everything was normal while we figured things out. Dad announced at lunch that he'd ordered new air filters to replace the ones that broke while he was gone. I watched him try to reach the outlets from his wheelchair. His arms weren't long enough and he couldn't bend down far enough. He finally gave up and asked me to plug them in for him. I said I would, but then I took the power cords and hid them in the back of my closet under some old clothes. That afternoon, I made myself walk to the front door. Claire's intervention had left it unlocked. I put my hand on the doorknob and my body immediately started doing its familiar panic thing. My heart raced and my throat got tight and I felt like I couldn't breathe right. But I made myself stand there and just breathe through it. I counted my breaths like Claire had shown me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. I opened the door 6 inches and stuck my hand outside into the sunlight. I waited to feel sick or dizzy like I always did before. Nothing happened except the warmth on my skin felt amazing. The sun touched my palm and I realized something. Dad must have been timing those pills to kick in whenever I tried to leave. All those years of reactions weren't my body warning me about danger. They were just drugs hitting my system right when I reached for freedom. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out to see a text from Claire. She asked if I was somewhere safe where I could talk. I texted back that I was still at Joyce's house and Dad didn't know where I was staying. Claire's response came fast, telling me we needed to build a case before going to authorities because without proof, it would just be my word against Dad's. She said I needed to photograph every medication bottle, save his internet history, and write down everything I remembered from the past 10 years. My hands shook reading her message because going back to that house felt impossible. But I texted back that I would try, that I wanted to do this right. Claire sent back a heart emoji and told me to be careful, to only go when Dad was asleep or distracted. I spent the rest of the day at Joyce's trying to work up courage for what I needed to do. That evening, I told Joyce I had to go back to get some things from my room. She offered to drive me, but I said no, that I needed to do this alone, that Dad would get suspicious if anyone came with me. Joyce made me promise to text her every 30 minutes so she'd know I was okay. The walk back to Dad's house took 20 minutes and my heart raced the whole way. I kept expecting to feel sick or dizzy like I used to, but my body just felt normal except for the fear. Dad's car was in the driveway when I got there. I used my key to unlock the front door as quietly as possible. Dad called out from the living room asking who was there. I told him it was me and walked in to find him in his wheelchair watching television. He looked surprised to see me and asked where I'd been. I lied and said I'd been staying with a friend from my online classes, that I needed some space to think. Dad's face did this thing where he tried to look understanding, but I could see anger underneath. He said he was worried about me being out in the world without my medications. I told him I felt fine and just came back to get some clothes. Dad wheeled closer and reminded me I'd left without taking my evening pills. He reached for the bottle on the side table, but I said I already took them at my friend's house. The lie came out smooth and easy. Dad studied my face for a long moment before nodding slowly. He said he was tired from his physical therapy appointment and needed to nap. I watched him wheel down the hallway to his room and close the door. I waited 15 minutes to make sure he was actually sleeping. Then I crept down the hallway to his room and pressed my ear against the door. I could hear his breathing, deep and steady. My hand turned the doorknob so slowly it took a full minute. The door opened without making noise. Dad was asleep in his bed, the wheelchair parked beside him. I moved to his bathroom where the medicine cabinet hung above the sink. My phone was already set to camera mode. I opened the cabinet and started photographing every single bottle. The labels showed names like lorazepam, alprazolam, diphenhydramine, all with dosages that looked high to me. The prescribing doctor was listed as Dr. Reeves on every bottle. Refill dates went back years, some bottles showing monthly refills for a decade. I took close-up shots of each label, making sure the dates and dosages were clear. There were at least 20 different bottles crammed into that small cabinet. Some were current, others expired but kept for some reason. I finished photographing the medications and closed the cabinet carefully. Dad's laptop sat on his desk in the corner of his room. I picked it up and carried it out to the kitchen table where I could hear if his wheelchair started moving. The laptop asked for a password. I tried his birthday, my birthday, our address. Nothing worked. I sat there trying to think what password he would use. Then I remembered the date he told me my sister died, the date he made up to scare me into staying home. I typed in the numbers and the laptop unlocked. My stomach turned knowing he used a fake death date as his password. I opened the browser and went straight to the history. The search terms made me want to throw up right there at the kitchen table. How to induce panic attacks. Medications that cause dizziness. Keeping adult children home. The searches went back years, starting around the time I turned 16. I scrolled through pages of his research into controlling me. He'd visited forums where other parents discussed keeping their kids dependent. I clicked on one forum thread and read Dad's posts under a username. He talked about me like I was an experiment. He described giving me sedatives time to hit when I tried to leave the house. He discussed which medications worked best to make me afraid and confused. Other forum members congratulated him on his success. Some asked for advice on doing the same thing to their own children. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking so hard I had to steady my phone against the table. The forum posts showed Dad planning this for months before he started. He researched my supposed allergies, found articles about environmental illness, created a whole fake medical condition. I was reading a post where Dad described my first panic attack as a breakthrough when I heard his wheelchair in the hallway. I barely had time to close the laptop and shove it back on his desk. I grabbed a random book from his shelf and was pretending to read it when Dad appeared in his doorway. He asked what I was doing in his room. My mind went completely blank with fear. I stammered something about looking for a book he borrowed from me months ago. Dad just stared at me with this look I couldn't read, his eyes moving from me to his desk to the laptop. He told me his room was off limits from now on, and I needed to ask permission before coming in here. I nodded and tried to walk past him, but he blocked the doorway with his wheelchair. He said he noticed I seemed different lately, more distant, and he hoped I wasn't being influenced by people who didn't understand my condition. I promised I wasn't, and he finally moved aside to let me leave. I went straight to my old room and closed the door, my whole body shaking. I pulled out my phone and texted Claire about what I found on Dad's computer. She responded immediately telling me this was enough, that what he did was criminal, that we needed to contact Adult Protective Services. I asked her what would happen to Dad if we reported him. Claire said he would probably face charges, but that wasn't my responsibility, that I needed to think about my own safety first. I lay on my old bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep even though it was past midnight. I kept replaying the look on Dad's face when he found me in his room, wondering if he suspected I'd seen his laptop. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but the area code was Seattle. I pressed play and heard a woman's voice say my name. She said this was Lena, that Claire told her everything, that she was so sorry she didn't realize I thought she was dead. I had to muffle my sobs with my pillow because the sound of her voice after 10 years broke something inside me. Lena said she'd been living in Seattle this whole time, working as a lawyer, married with 2 kids. She said our family failed me by not questioning Dad's stories about my illness. She said she wanted to help however she could, that she'd get on a plane today if I needed her. I listened to the message 5 more times, hearing her describe her law practice and her husband and her daughters who were my nieces. She talked about her life like it was normal and happy while I'd been trapped thinking she was gone. The next morning, Dad called me to the living room. He was already sitting in his wheelchair waiting for me. He patted the couch cushion next to him and told me we needed to have a serious talk. I sat down and he started talking about how worried he was that I wasn't taking my health seriously enough. He reminded me about the time I collapsed on the porch trying to leave, how I almost died, how my body knows danger even when my mind forgets. He said the outside world had gotten even more toxic while I was ignoring my condition. He reached over and took my hand, his grip tight, and told me he couldn't bear to lose another daughter. While he keeps talking about how the outside air would destroy my immune system and how he studied my condition for years, I slide my hand under the blanket on my lap and pull out my phone. My fingers shake as I open the voice recorder app and press the red button. Then I tuck the phone between my thigh and the couch cushion where he can't see it. Dad wheels closer and starts explaining the specific chemicals in modern air that react with my genetics, using words like particulates and toxins and electromagnetic fields. He says my sister didn't listen to these warnings, and that's why she got corrupted by the outside world, why she abandoned our family and forgot what really matters. He tells me about how he researched my condition every single day while I slept, how he consulted with specialists who confirmed his theories, how the medication he gives me is the only thing keeping my body stable enough to survive. His voice gets softer when he talks about finding me collapsed on the porch that time I tried to leave, how he thought he'd lost me, how he promised himself he'd never let me get that close to danger again. After 20 minutes of this lecture, he finally wheels back toward the kitchen saying he needs to take his heart medication, and I wait until I hear him in the other room before I stop the recording. My hands won't stay steady as I attach the audio file to a text message for Claire, along with the photos I took of the medication bottles yesterday. I type just 3 words, "He's still lying," and hit send before I can change my mind. Claire calls me 30 seconds later and I answer on the first ring, pressing the phone tight against my ear. She sounds angry and scared at the same time, telling me she just listened to the whole recording and she's contacting someone called Adult Protective Services right now, today, this morning. I ask her what that means, and she explains they investigate when adults are being abused or controlled by family members, that they have legal power to step in and help people get safe. She promises me I won't have to do this alone anymore. That help is actually coming this time, that I just need to hang on a little longer. I want to believe her, but 10 years of Dad's voice in my head keeps whispering that I'm making a mistake, that I'm going to regret this, that I need him to survive. After we hang up, I delete the call from my phone history in case Dad checks it. Then I go to my room and close the door and try to breathe normally. 2 days pass where everything feels wrong and tense. Dad watches me more carefully than usual, asking questions about why I seem distracted, whether I'm feeling okay, if my symptoms are getting worse. I lie and say I'm fine, just tired, and he nods but doesn't look convinced. On the 3rd morning, my phone rings with a number I don't recognize and my stomach drops when I answer. The woman on the other end says her name is Sydney Graham, and she's an investigator with Adult Protective Services, that they received a report about my situation, and she needs to schedule a home visit to talk with me. Her voice is calm and professional, but hearing those words makes my whole body flood with relief and terror at the exact same time. She asks when would be a good time to visit, and I realize Dad can't know about this, can't be here when she comes. So I tell her he has a cardiology follow-up appointment next Tuesday at 10 in the morning. Sydney says she'll come then, and I should have someone I trust with me if possible, and I promise her Claire will be here. The days until Tuesday move too slow and too fast. I text Claire about the appointment, and she says she's taking the day off work to drive the 3 hours to be with me. On Monday night, I barely sleep because I keep going over what I'm going to say, how I'm going to explain 10 years of captivity to a stranger who might not believe me. Claire shows up Tuesday morning at 8, and we sit at the kitchen table drinking coffee while Dad gets ready for his appointment. She brought a notebook, and we write down everything I need to tell Sydney, all the medications and the fake allergies and the internet searches and the forums where Dad discussed keeping me trapped. My hands shake so bad I can barely hold the pen. At 9:30, Dad wheels himself to the front door and tells me to lock it after he leaves, and I nod and watch through the window as the medical transport van picks him up. The second he's gone, Claire hugs me and says I'm doing great, that I'm so brave, that this is going to change everything. Sydney arrives at exactly 10 o'clock, and she's younger than I expected, maybe 40, wearing regular clothes instead of a uniform. She shakes my hand and Claire's hand and sits down at our kitchen table, pulling out a tablet and a notebook. For the next 2 hours, I tell her everything while she takes notes and asks questions that make me realize she actually believes me. I show her the medication bottles and she photographs each one, reading the labels carefully and writing down the prescription information. She asks to see my room and I take her there, watching as she photographs the sealed windows and the unplugged air filters that Dad said were keeping me alive. When I show her Dad's laptop and pull up his internet history, Sydney's face gets hard and angry in a way that makes me feel less crazy. She tells me what Dad did has a name, that it's called coercive control and medical abuse, and hearing official words for it makes something break open in my chest. Before Sydney leaves, she programs her direct number into my phone and tells me to call immediately if I feel unsafe, anytime, day or night. She explains the investigation process, that they'll need to verify the medications with the prescribing doctor and interview Dad about his treatment of me, that this will take time but I won't be abandoned in this house. She asks if I have somewhere else I could stay, and I look at Claire, who nods and says I can come to her place anytime. Sydney writes something in her notebook and says she'll be in touch within 48 hours, that I should document anything concerning that happens, and then she's gone and it's just me and Claire sitting in the quiet house. Claire makes us lunch and we eat without talking much because there's nothing left to say except wait. Dad comes home from his appointment at 2 in the afternoon, and the second he wheels through the door, I can tell he knows something is different. He looks around the kitchen and living room like he's searching for evidence. Then he wheels right up to me and asks if anyone came by while he was gone. I shake my head and say no, nobody. And he stares at me for a long moment before nodding slowly. All evening he watches me carefully, asking questions about what I did today, whether I went outside, if I talked to anyone. I keep my answers short and try to act normal, but my heart won't stop racing. At dinner, he barely eats, just pushes food around his plate while studying my face like he's trying to read my thoughts. After we clean up, he says he's tired and wheels himself to his room early, but I can hear him moving around in there for hours. That night, I'm lying in bed trying to sleep when I hear his wheelchair in the hallway. My door opens and Dad wheels himself right into the doorway, parking his chair so it blocks the whole opening. He says he's been worried about me lately, that I seem depressed and distant, that depression is really common with my medical condition. He tells me he needs to monitor me more closely to make sure I don't try to hurt myself, and he's going to sleep right here in the hallway tonight where he can hear if I need help. I sit up in bed and tell him I'm fine. I don't need monitoring, but he just shakes his head and says, "This is for my own safety." I realize he's trying to trap me again even from a wheelchair, trying to control my movements and cut me off from the outside world. After he settles in, I grab my phone under the covers and text Sydney about Dad blocking my door. She calls me back within 3 minutes. Her voice is calm but serious, telling me to stay calm and keep my phone charged and nearby at all times. She says she's expediting the investigation based on this new information, that blocking someone in their room is a major red flag. She asks if I feel physically safe right now, and I whisper yes. He's just blocking the door, and she tells me to call 911 immediately if that changes. We talk for 10 minutes while she explains what's going to happen next, how they're going to interview Dad and review the medical records, how there are legal options to protect me if needed. After we hang up, I lie awake listening to Dad's breathing in the hallway, knowing everything is about to change and I can't go back. The next morning, I hear voices downstairs, and when I look out my bedroom door, Dad's wheelchair is gone from the hallway. I creep down the stairs and find Claire in the kitchen with another woman I've never seen before. Claire introduces her as Joyce, a friend who has a spare room if I need a safe place to stay. Joyce is maybe 50 with gray hair and warm eyes, and she walks right up to me and takes both my hands. She tells me she survived her own bad marriage where her husband controlled everything she did, and she'll be damned if she watches another woman stay trapped like she was. Her voice is direct and strong, not treating me like I'm fragile or broken, just like I'm someone who needs help and deserves it. Dad wheels into the kitchen and stops short when he sees Joyce, asking who she is and what she's doing in his house. Joyce turns to him and says she's here to offer me options, and Dad's face goes red as he starts talking about my medical condition and how I can't leave. Joyce just looks at him steadily and says the medical professionals will sort that out, won't they? And Dad's mouth snaps shut. Claire suggests we all have coffee and talk calmly, but the air in the kitchen feels like it might explode. Joyce turns to me and says we should go to the pharmacy right now and ask for my full medication history, that it's something anyone can request about their own prescriptions. Dad's wheelchair jerks forward and he starts talking about how I can't possibly go outside, how my body isn't ready, how this is too much too fast. Joyce just looks at him and holds out her hand to me without saying anything else, and I stare at her open palm for what feels like forever before I reach out and take it. Her hand is warm and steady, and she pulls me gently toward the front door while Dad's voice gets louder behind us, telling us to stop, demanding we listen to him. But Joyce keeps walking, and somehow my feet keep moving too. We step outside together, and the morning air hits my face, and I wait for the familiar panic to start, for my throat to close up, and my vision to tunnel. But nothing happens except I feel the sun on my skin for the second time in my adult life. Joyce guides me to her car parked in the driveway and opens the passenger door for me, and I slide into the seat while my whole body shakes, but not from sickness, just from the shock of actually doing this. She starts the engine and backs out of the driveway while I grip the door handle so hard my knuckles turn white, watching Dad's face in the window getting smaller as we drive away. The drive feels both endless and too short at the same time. I keep waiting to feel sick, for the dizziness to hit, or the nausea to start, but instead I just feel incredibly alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Trees pass by the window, then houses, then a strip mall, then more houses, and I'm seeing the world that kept moving forward while I was frozen in that house for 10 years. Joyce talks the whole time about completely normal things like how the traffic is lighter than usual today, and how she needs to get her car inspected next month, and how the weather forecast says rain tomorrow. She doesn't treat me like I'm fragile or broken, doesn't ask if I'm okay every 5 seconds, just talks like we're two regular people going on a regular errand together. I watch people walking on sidewalks and cars stopping at red lights, and a kid riding a bike past a park, and everything looks both exactly like I remember and completely foreign at the same time. The pharmacy is in a building I don't recognize, which makes sense because everything has changed in 10 years. Joyce parks and we walk inside together, my legs feeling weird and shaky but still working, still carrying me forward. The bright lights inside make me squint, and there are so many people, maybe 6 or 7 customers browsing the aisles, and I have to focus on breathing steadily to keep from panicking. Joyce walks right up to the counter where a young guy with glasses is working. and I follow her, standing slightly behind her shoulder. She nudges me forward gently, and I clear my throat and ask if I can get my full medication history, and the pharmacist nods like this is a totally normal request that people make all the time. He types on his computer for a minute, then walks to a printer in the back, and when he returns, he's holding what looks like 20 or 30 pages of paper. He hands them to me, and I just stare at the stack. All these prescriptions with my name on them. Proof of what Dad did written out in official pharmacy records. We sit in Joyce's car in the parking lot and spread the pages across the dashboard and center console, and Joyce starts reading through them carefully, while I try to make sense of the medical terminology. She points at a line dated from 4 years ago and shows me where it says lorazepam, then flips to another page, and points out another prescription for the same thing from just 2 months later, and she explains that the refills came way too frequently for someone actually taking them as prescribed. She finds alprazolam and zolpidem and diphenhydramine, all these names I don't recognize, and she tells me these are sedatives and anti-anxiety medications and antihistamines that cause drowsiness. We flip through more pages and she points out overlapping prescriptions that should never be combined, dosages that seem too high, refill patterns that don't make sense for someone with actual allergies. Every page has Dr. Reeves's name on it. This doctor I've never met in person who apparently prescribed me enough drugs to keep me docile and confused for a decade, based solely on whatever Dad told him. Joyce pulls out her phone and starts taking photos of the most important pages, the ones showing the sedatives and the overlapping prescriptions and the too frequent refills. She texts each photo to Sydney along with a message explaining what we found, building the case piece by piece. I watch her work and feel this strange mix of gratitude and shame, grateful that she's helping me but ashamed that I need this much help, that I couldn't figure this out on my own. We find a prescription dated exactly 3 days after I tried to leave when I was 20, the one that ended with me collapsed on the porch. And it's for a strong sedative with a note about panic episodes. Joyce takes an extra photo of that one and circles the date with her finger on the screen before sending it. The drive back feels different from the drive there. Heavier somehow now that we have proof of what Dad did. Joyce is quieter now, focused on the road, and I stare out the window trying to prepare myself for what's coming next. When we pull into the driveway, I see Dad's wheelchair positioned right by the front window, and I know he's been sitting there the whole time we were gone, waiting and getting angrier. We walk inside and he's moved to the living room, his face red and his hands gripping the wheelchair armrests so tight I can see his knuckles standing out white against his skin. He demands to know where I went and who gave me permission to leave the house, his voice loud and sharp in a way that used to make me immediately apologize and back down. But something is different now. Maybe because of the pages of prescriptions still clutched in my hand, or maybe because Joyce is standing right next to me, or maybe because I finally understand that his anger is about losing control, not about protecting me. I look him straight in the face and tell him I don't need his permission anymore, and my voice only shakes a little bit when I say it. Dad's whole expression changes in an instant, the anger melting into tears that start rolling down his face. He tells me I'm going to die if I keep this up, that my body can't handle the exposure to the outside world, that he can't bear to bury another daughter after what happened to Lena. His voice breaks on her name and he reaches out toward me with one shaking hand, and even though I know exactly what he's doing, even though Sydney's notes named this manipulation tactic specifically, my chest still aches with guilt. Part of me wants to go to him and tell him it's okay, and promise I'll stay safe, wants to make him stop crying, and go back to being the dad who held me when I was scared, even though I know now that he was the one making me scared in the first place. The guilt sits heavy in my stomach like something physical, this awful feeling that I'm hurting him by trying to save myself. Joyce steps between us before I can move toward him, positioning herself so she's blocking his view of me. She tells him in this calm, steady voice that the medications are being reviewed by adult protective services and medical professionals, that his story about my allergies doesn't match the evidence we found, that this ends now. Dad's tears stop like someone flipped a switch and his face goes hard, and he says he's calling the police to report Joyce for kidnapping me, for taking an ill person out of their home against medical advice. Joyce pulls out her phone and holds it up and she says please do. She would love to explain this whole situation to the police and show them the prescription records. They stare at each other for a long moment and I hold my breath waiting to see what Dad will do. But finally he just makes this disgusted sound and wheels his chair around and heads toward his bedroom. The door slams behind him hard enough that I flinch. I stand there in the living room shaking, my whole body trembling like I might fall apart into pieces right here on the carpet. Joyce walks to the kitchen and I hear water running and the clink of mugs, and a few minutes later she comes back with 2 cups of tea. She sits on the couch and pats the cushion next to her, and I sit down carefully, taking the warm mug in both hands. She tells me I did great today, that standing up to people who've controlled you is one of the hardest things a person can do, that I'm stronger than I know. I don't feel strong at all. I feel like I just survived something barely, and might not survive the next round, but I nod and sip the tea and try to believe her. She talks about her own marriage, how her husband used to control everything from what she wore to who she talked to, how it took her 3 tries to actually leave him for good. She says the guilt is normal, that abusers are experts at making you feel responsible for their feelings, But that doesn't mean you have to stay trapped to keep them happy. My phone rings around 6 that evening, and it's Sydney. She tells me she got the photos Joyce sent, and she's scheduled a formal home visit for tomorrow at 10 in the morning with a medical consultant who will review all the medications. Her voice is serious when she warns me that Dad will likely be very confrontational during the visit, that he'll probably try to control the narrative and paint himself as a devoted caregiver. She suggests I consider staying somewhere else tonight, maybe at Clare's or even at Joyce's place, just to have some space before tomorrow's meeting. I tell her I need to see this through, that I can't keep running away, and there's a pause before she says, okay, but to keep my phone charged and nearby at all times. After we hang up, Joyce offers again to let me sleep at her house, but I shake my head and she doesn't push. Just make sure I have her number saved in my phone. That night, I lie in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to every sound in the house. Around 9, I hear Dad's wheelchair moving in the hallway, then again at 10, then at 11. Each time I hear the wheels on the hardwood floor, my whole body tenses up, waiting for him to try the door or say something, but he just rolls past and then back again. I can't sleep because I keep playing out scenarios of what might happen tomorrow, imagining Dad's reactions and what the medical consultant might say, and whether I'll have the courage to speak up when it matters. Around midnight, I finally doze off but wake up again at 1 when I hear the wheelchair outside my door, then again at 2. At 3 in the morning, there's a soft knock and Dad's voice asking if I'm awake, saying he wants to apologize for getting upset earlier, that we should talk before tomorrow. I squeeze my eyes shut and stay completely still and silent, barely breathing, pretending to be asleep even though my heart is pounding. So loud I'm sure he can hear it through the door. After a minute, the wheelchair rolls away again, and I hear his bedroom door close, and I lie there in the dark knowing that tomorrow everything changes, and there's no going back from this point forward. Morning light comes through my window, and I haven't slept more than an hour total. I get up and shower, my hands shaking so badly I drop the soap twice. Dad is already in the living room when I come out, dressed in clean clothes with his hair combed, looking like the concerned father he's always pretended to be. He asks if I slept well, and I lie and say yes, then sit on the couch as far from him as possible. The doorbell rings at exactly 10 o'clock, and Dad wheels himself to answer it, his face arranged in that welcoming smile he uses with strangers. Sydney comes in first, wearing a professional blazer and carrying a folder, then a woman in scrubs who introduces herself as Beatrice, and finally a police officer in uniform, who doesn't say much but stands near the door with his arms crossed. Dad invites everyone to sit and immediately starts talking about how challenging my condition has been, how he's devoted his entire life to keeping me safe from environmental toxins. He explains about the special air filters and the sealed windows and the careful medication schedule, his voice full of tired sacrifice. Sydney takes notes while Beatrice walks around the room looking at the filters that aren't plugged in, touching the sealed windows, picking up the medication bottles from the coffee table where Joyce left them yesterday. Dad keeps talking about how doctors don't understand rare conditions like mine, how he's had to become an expert himself through years of research. Beatrice sits down across from Dad and opens one of the medication bottles, reading the label carefully. She asks Dad to explain the clinical reasoning behind combining this particular sedative with 2 different anti-anxiety medications and an antihistamine. Dad starts to answer confidently, but then pauses, his explanation getting tangled as Beatrice asks more specific questions about dosing schedules and drug interactions. She wants to know which doctor prescribed this combination, and Dad says Dr. Reeves, his friend, prescribed everything based on Dad's detailed descriptions of my symptoms. Beatrice asks if Dr. Reeves ever actually examined me, and Dad admits no, that my condition makes it too dangerous for me to go to medical offices. She picks up another bottle and asks about the refill frequency, pointing out that some of these medications are being refilled every 2 weeks when they should last a month. Dad's face gets red and he starts talking faster, explaining that sometimes I need extra doses during severe reactions, that he has to adjust based on my symptoms. Sydney interrupts and asks if she can speak with me privately, and Dad immediately says no. That stress makes my condition worse. The police officer shifts his weight and Sydney says calmly that she needs to hear from me directly. She turns to me and asks if I want to continue living in this house under these conditions. The room goes completely quiet and I can feel everyone watching me. Dad reaches toward me with his hand out, his face crumpling like I'm killing him. I open my mouth and nothing comes out at first. Then I hear myself say, no, just that one word. Dad's wheelchair jerks forward and he's trying to grab my arm, but the police officer steps between us, not touching anyone but just being there. Sydney asks if I have somewhere safe to go and I nod and say Joyce's house. She tells me I can pack a bag right now and leave today, and suddenly this is actually happening and I can't breathe right. I stand up and walk to my room, moving through the space like I'm watching myself from outside my body. I pull out the old backpack I used for school 10 years ago and start putting clothes in it, not really thinking about what I'm choosing. My hands find shirts and pants and underwear and I stuff them in without folding anything. I grab my toothbrush from the bathroom and the hairbrush from my dresser and the phone charger Claire gave me. Under my bed, I find the journal I kept when I was 16, before Dad took away my computer and started controlling everything I wrote. I pack it at the bottom of the bag underneath my clothes. This proof that I used to have thoughts of my own. Dad appears in my doorway and I freeze with a pair of socks in my hands. He's crying now, real tears running down his face, and he tells me I'm making a terrible mistake. Joyce is there too, standing behind him, and she asks him to move so I can finish packing. I zip up the backpack and put it on and walk toward the door. Dad's wheelchair blocks the hallway and I have to squeeze past him, and that's when he grabs my hand hard enough to hurt. He whispers right in my ear that I'll come back when I realize how dangerous the world is, that I'll get sick and scared and need him to save me. His fingers dig into my wrist and I pull away, harder than I mean to, and my hand comes free. I tell him I hope he gets help, and I mean it, even though I also hate him for what he did to 10 years of my life. Joyce takes my backpack and guides me toward the front door where Sydney and Beatrice and the police officer are waiting. I don't look back at Dad, but I can hear his wheelchair behind me and his voice saying my name over and over. Then I'm outside in the bright morning sun, and Joyce is opening her car door and I'm getting in and we're driving away. Joyce's house is 20 minutes across town in a neighborhood with small yards and cars parked on the street. She pulls into a driveway next to a blue house with white trim and flower pots on the porch. Inside, everything is cluttered in a comfortable way, magazines on the coffee table and dishes in the sink and photos covering the walls. She shows me down a hallway to a small bedroom with a bed and a dresser and a window with actual curtains that move when air comes through. Joyce tells me the kitchen is always open and I can eat whenever I'm hungry, and the bathroom is next door, and the only house rules are to clean up after myself and let her know if I'm going out. These aren't control rules, just normal living together rules, and it makes my throat tight. I put my backpack on the bed and sit down next to it, staring at the window that opens. Joyce asks if I need anything, and I shake my head because I don't know what I need. I don't know anything right now. She leaves the door open when she goes, and I can hear her moving around in the kitchen. Normal sounds of someone making lunch. That night, I lie in the unfamiliar bed in the unfamiliar room, and my chest starts getting tight around 8 o'clock. By 9, I can't breathe right, and my heart is beating too fast, and I know I'm dying even though I know I'm not dying. I try to stay quiet, but I must make some sound because Joyce appears in the doorway. She doesn't ask what's wrong or try to fix it. She just sits on the floor next to the bed. She breathes slowly and deeply and tells me to match her breathing, in for 4 counts and out for 4 counts. After a while, the panic gets a little better, but then it comes back an hour later and then again at midnight. Each time Joyce comes and sits with me and breathes and reminds me that panic always passes, that my body is remembering being afraid, but I'm actually safe now. She says my body spent 10 years learning that the world was dangerous, and it will take time to learn something different. The next morning, Sydney calls my phone and tells me they're pursuing emergency protective orders to prevent Dad from contacting me while the investigation continues. She explains this doesn't mean I can never see him again, just that right now I need space to recover without his influence pulling me back. The protective order will last 6 months, and then I can decide if I want to extend it or not. I ask what happens to Dad, and Sydney says he'll be required to undergo psychiatric evaluation and treatment, and there may be criminal charges depending on what the investigation finds. After we hang up, I sit on Joyce's couch and cry, not sure if I'm relieved or guilty or both. The first week at Joyce's house, I mostly sleep, my body finally releasing 10 years of tension now that I'm away from constant watching. I sleep 12 hours at night and then nap during the day, waking up confused about where I am. Joyce brings me food on a tray and I eat it without really tasting it. She sits in the armchair near the couch reading her book while I lie there, not talking, just being nearby. Sometimes I cry for no reason, and she hands me tissues without making it a big deal. By the end of the week, I'm sleeping less and eating more and starting to notice things like what shows are on TV and what Joyce is cooking for dinner. On day 8, Beatrice calls my phone and asks if I'm ready to start therapy. I tell her I can't leave the house yet, and she says that's fine. We can do telehealth sessions on video. She asks what I need, and I start crying again, telling her I don't know, that I'm 26, but I feel like I'm still 16. She says that makes sense because that's when my life got frozen, and now I get to figure out who I am without Dad controlling everything. Our first session is only 20 minutes because that's all I can handle, but we schedule another one for 3 days later. Beatrice doesn't try to make me talk about everything at once. She just asks small questions about what I'm feeling right now in this moment, and somehow that makes it easier to answer. Our next session 3 days later runs longer because I can handle more now, and Beatrice introduces something called trauma bonding that makes everything click into place. She explains that when someone controls your survival like Dad did with food and medicine and shelter, your brain starts linking them with staying alive even when they're the danger. My body learned to associate Dad with safety because he was the only source of comfort after he created the panic, and she says that's why leaving felt like dying, even though staying was actually killing me. She tells me undoing that programming takes time and patience, that my brain needs to slowly learn Dad isn't necessary for survival anymore, that feeling guilty for leaving doesn't mean leaving was wrong. I spend the rest of that day thinking about how my body betrayed me by loving the person who hurt me, except Beatrice says it wasn't betrayal, but survival instinct doing exactly what it evolved to do. 2 days later, Claire shows up at Joyce's door carrying a laptop in a bright blue case and announces she bought it for me. She sets it up on Joyce's kitchen table and shows me how to turn it on, how to use the touchpad, how to open programs, and I feel grateful and completely lost at the same time. Claire already created email and Facebook accounts in my name and wrote down all the passwords, and she walks me through logging in and changing the passwords to something only I know. The laptop has internet that isn't filtered or monitored, and I can look up anything I want, but I just stare at the search bar not knowing where to start after 10 years of Dad choosing what I could see. Claire stays for 2 hours teaching me basics like how to type in the search box and click links and open new tabs, things everyone else learned gradually as teenagers while I was frozen. After she leaves, I sit with the laptop open in front of me and type my own name into the search bar just to prove I can, that nobody is watching or controlling what I look for anymore. I find Lena's Facebook profile by searching her name plus Seattle, and suddenly I'm looking at photos of the sister I thought was dead for 10 years. She has Dad's dark hair and my nose, and she's smiling in every picture, holding 2 little girls who look like smaller versions of her. The girls are maybe 7 and 9 years old, wearing soccer uniforms in some photos and fancy dresses in others, and they're my nieces I never got to meet. Lena's profile says she's married to someone named Marcus and works at a law firm downtown, and there are photos of her at graduations and weddings and normal life events that happened while I thought she was in a grave. My hands shake so hard I can barely control the mouse, but I click the friend request button and then close the laptop because I can't handle seeing more right now. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzes with a Facebook notification, and Lena accepted my request immediately. She sends me a message asking how I'm doing and if I'm really okay now, and I message back that I'm staying with Joyce and learning to be a person again. We start texting through Facebook Messenger about small, safe things like her daughter's soccer games and what I'm learning on the laptop. She tells me about Emma scoring 2 goals last weekend and Sophia getting Student of the Month, and I tell her about figuring out how to use email and search engines. Neither of us mentions the 10 years of nothing between us yet because that's too big to fit into text messages, but just talking about normal daily things feels like slowly building a bridge across the gap. The next day, Sydney calls my phone with an update about the investigation, and I answer on the second ring. She tells me Dr. Reeves is under investigation by the medical board for prescribing controlled substances to me without ever examining me or meeting me in person. Sydney warns me this process is slow and the outcome uncertain because medical board investigations can take months or even years, but at least there are consequences starting to happen. She says they're also reviewing all of Dr. Reeves's other patients to see if there's a pattern of inappropriate prescribing, and I feel sick thinking about other people maybe trapped like I was. After we hang up, I tell Joyce about the investigation, and she says good, that doctors who enable abuse should lose their licenses. That afternoon, Joyce announces we're going to the library and I need to come with her, because it's time I got a library card. The library is only 6 blocks away, and Joyce drives us there in her old car, and I watch the buildings pass by the window trying to remember what normal life looks like. Inside the library smells like books and coffee, and the librarian at the desk doesn't know this moment is huge for me. She just processes my application like it's routine. I fill out the form with my name and Joyce's address, and the librarian types everything into her computer and prints out a card with my name on it. Joyce watches me slide the card into my pocket, and she squeezes my shoulder but doesn't make it a big deal, just says now I can check out whatever books I want. I keep touching the card in my pocket on the drive home like proof I exist in the world again, that I have an identity outside of being Dad's prisoner. The next morning, Joyce asks if I want to take a walk around the neighborhood, and I say yes, even though my stomach immediately knots with anxiety. We make it to the end of her driveway before I have to stop and breathe through the panic, but Joyce just waits patiently until I can move again. We walk slowly down the sidewalk, and I have to turn back after 5 minutes because my heart is racing too hard, but Joyce says 5 minutes is good for the first try. We do this every day for a week, and gradually I make it around the whole block without turning back, then 2 blocks, then all the way to the small park 3 streets over. At the park, I see parents pushing kids on swings and teenagers sitting on the grass talking and people walking their dogs, all the normal life that continued while I was locked away. A woman around my age jogs past us and smiles at me as she goes by, and I smile back before I can overthink it. Joyce sees this and grins but doesn't comment, just keeps walking like this tiny interaction isn't a huge accomplishment. That evening during our video therapy session, I tell Beatrice about walking to the park and smiling at a stranger, and she suggests we create a hierarchy of my fears. We spend the session listing things from what I can do now, like walking around the block, building up to goals that seem impossible like going to a coffee shop or riding a bus or being in crowds. Taking a class is near the top of the list, along with going to a store alone and having a conversation with someone besides Joyce or Claire or Beatrice. Beatrice says we'll work on these goals gradually, that I don't have to do everything at once, that recovery isn't linear, and some days will be harder than others. 2 weeks later, Sydney calls to schedule a meeting to update me on the investigation and give me some documents to review. Her office is downtown, which means taking the bus, and Joyce offers to come with me for my first time on public transportation in 10 years. The morning of the meeting, I wake up with my stomach in knots, but I get dressed and eat breakfast, and Joyce drives us to the bus stop. Standing at the stop waiting for the bus, I count my breaths and remind myself that panic always passes, that my body is remembering old fear, not responding to current danger. The bus arrives and I climb the steps behind Joyce and we find seats near the middle, and I grip the metal pole so hard my knuckles turn white. I watch out the window as we move through the city, and nobody on the bus knows this is monumental for me. They're all just going about their normal days. When we reach our stop and get off the bus, I feel proud and exhausted and capable all at once. Like I just did something impossible that turned out to be possible after all. Sydney's office has gray walls and filing cabinets and a desk covered in folders, and she gestures for Joyce and me to sit in the 2 chairs across from her. She pulls out a thick file with my name on it and opens it to show me documents with official stamps and signatures. Sydney explains that the investigation found enough evidence to require Dad to undergo a full psychiatric evaluation before the case can be closed, and she slides a paper across the desk that lists all the medications he gave me over the years. The list goes on for 2 pages, and seeing it all written out like that makes my stomach hurt. She shows me another document called a protective order that has Dad's name at the top and mine at the bottom, and she points to the section that says he cannot contact me in any way for 6 months. No phone calls, no letters, no showing up at Joyce's house, nothing. Sydney says this gives me space to heal without his influence, and I stare at the paper trying to understand that I'm actually protected now by law. I ask her what happens when the 6 months are up, if Dad can just come back into my life, and Sydney leans forward and says, "That's completely my choice. I can extend the order for another 6 months or longer. I can agree to supervised contact if I want to try that, or I can cut ties completely and never see him again." The idea that I get to decide this feels strange and new, like someone handed me a remote control to my own life that I didn't know existed. Joyce squeezes my hand while Sydney explains my options, and I realize I don't have to figure it all out right now. The next week, Joyce helps me apply for a state ID since I never learned to drive and don't have a license. We need my birth certificate, and Dad kept it locked in his safe along with all my important papers. So Joyce drives me back to the house while Dad is at his court-ordered evaluation appointment. Walking into that house again makes my chest tight, but Joyce stays right beside me and we go straight to Dad's office. The safe is behind a painting of mountains, and Joyce knows someone who can open it, so we call him and he comes over with his tools. When the safe door swings open, I see my birth certificate right on top, along with my social security card and some savings bonds Dad never told me about. Holding my birth certificate in my hands feels like reclaiming proof that I'm a real person with rights, not just someone who exists in Dad's version of reality. We take everything important and leave, and I don't look back at my old room or the sealed windows or any of it. 3 days later, my phone rings instead of buzzing with a text, and when I see Lena's name on the screen, my hands shake so much I almost drop it. I answer and hear my sister's voice for the first time in 10 years, familiar and foreign at the same time, like a song I used to know. We talk for an hour about small things at first, her daughters and their school activities, her law practice and the cases she works on. Then Lena's voice gets quiet and she apologizes for not questioning Dad's stories about my illness, for assuming everything was fine when she called and he said I was too sick to come to the phone. She says she should have pushed harder, should have demanded to see me, should have known something was wrong. I tell her I don't blame her because I believed the stories too. I thought I was dying from environmental illness, and she was corrupted by the outside world. Lena cries and I cry, and we just breathe together on the phone, 2 sisters trying to find each other again across a decade of lies. During my next therapy video call, I tell Beatrice I want to work toward getting my GED since I never finished high school. She pulls up her computer screen and we spend the session researching programs that offer accommodations for anxiety. Beatrice finds an online prep course that lets me work at my own pace from home, and she helps me understand the testing process and what supports I can request. The idea of being a student again makes my heart race, but it also feels like reclaiming the future Dad stole when he pulled me out of school at 16. Beatrice says education is power and independence, and every skill I gain makes me less dependent on anyone else. She reminds me that I already proved I can learn by doing all those online classes Dad chose for me, and now I get to choose what I study. Joyce introduces me to her friend who runs a small online business selling handmade jewelry. The friend needs help with data entry, updating inventory lists, and processing orders, and she offers me part-time remote work I can do from Joyce's house. I accept even though I'm scared I'll mess it up, scared I'll be too slow or make mistakes or not understand the systems. Joyce sets me up at the kitchen table with the laptop and shows me how to log into the business software. I start working a few hours each day, carefully typing in product codes and customer information, checking everything twice before I click submit. The work is simple, but it's mine. Something I'm doing that has nothing to do with Dad or his control. My first paycheck arrives in the mail 3 days later, and it's only for 3 days of work, but I stare at it like it's a miracle. Joyce drives me to the bank and helps me open an account, my first bank account ever with my name on it. The bank lady asks for my ID, and I hand over my brand new state ID that has my photo and birth date and address. She types information into her computer and prints out papers for me to sign, and then she hands me a temporary debit card and a deposit slip. Seeing my name on the account with money I earned myself makes me feel real in a new way. Like I exist in the world's systems now instead of just in Dad's locked house. I enroll in the online GED prep course that same week and log in to find modules for math, science, social studies, and language arts. I'm shocked to discover I remember most of what I learned before Dad pulled me out of school. All those lessons from sophomore year still stored somewhere in my brain. The coursework is actually easier than I expected. Basic algebra and grammar rules and historical facts that come back to me as I work through the practice questions. I finished the first module in 2 weeks, working an hour or two each evening after my data entry job. Each completed lesson feels like proof that Dad didn't completely erase the person I was before, that some part of 16-year-old me survived the decade of fog and isolation. Lena calls again and invites me to visit her in Seattle when I'm ready. She says I can meet her family and stay as long as I want, that her daughters are excited to meet their aunt they never knew existed. I tell her I'm not ready yet, that leaving Joyce's house for more than a few hours still makes me panic. Lena says she understands and she'll wait however long it takes, that we have time now to build a relationship. She promises to keep calling every week and sending pictures of her kids, and I promise to keep working on getting stronger so I can visit someday. The conversation ends with both of us saying I love you, words that feel both natural and strange after so many years of silence. 6 months after leaving Dad's house, I take the GED test at a local community college. Joyce drives me there early in the morning and walks me to the testing center, and I sit in a room with 10 other people taking the same test. My hands shake when I open the test booklet, but I make myself read each question carefully and fill in the answer bubbles. The math section is hardest, but I remember enough to work through the problems. 4 hours later, I finish all the sections and turn in my test, exhausted and proud and terrified about the results. 3 weeks later, I get an email saying I passed all sections on the first try. Joyce takes me out to celebrate at a restaurant downtown, and I cry right there at the table, overwhelmed by the idea that I'm officially a high school graduate at 27 years old. Joyce helps me fill out the community college enrollment forms the next week, and I choose 2 classes for spring semester, psychology and English composition. The college website has a section for disability accommodations, and I check the boxes for anxiety support, extra time on tests, and permission to leave class if I need to. I don't feel ashamed asking for help anymore, because Beatrice taught me that accommodations aren't weakness. They're just tools that let me succeed like everyone else. The confirmation email arrives 3 days later saying I'm officially enrolled as a student, and I save it to read over and over, proof that I'm building a future Dad tried to steal. Winter passes slowly while I work my data entry job and attend therapy sessions, and take practice walks around Joyce's neighborhood. I finish my first online course module and start the second one, learning about sentence structure and essay writing. Lena calls every Sunday and sends photos of her daughters playing soccer and doing homework, and I save every single picture in a folder on my phone labeled family. On a sunny morning in early spring, I wake up and decide today is the day I walk to the coffee shop 3 blocks from Joyce's house. I get dressed and brush my teeth and walk out the front door without telling Joyce first because I want to prove I can do this alone. The walk takes 10 minutes and my hands shake the whole time, but I make it to the coffee shop and order a latte from the person behind the counter. I sit by the window watching people walk past on the sidewalk, normal people living normal lives, and I'm one of them now. My phone buzzes with a text from Lena showing a photo of her daughters wearing matching soccer uniforms and smiling at the camera. I open my phone's camera and take a selfie sitting at the coffee shop table with my latte, and I text it back to Lena with the message, "Building my life one coffee at a time." I try to make these stories worth your time, a mix of drama, lessons, and things you can actually use. If that's your vibe, subscribe and save yourself a few mistakes later.